Hello. This is now a workout exercise time. We're gonna get things swollen to here.
The PFCizer is a cognitive workout system that will involve a range of games and exercises meant to make your prefrontal cortex the most it can be. With PFCizer, instead of free weights, we will be employing a range of challenging interpersonal navigation.
My bad. Wrong model.
The PFCizer is a cognitive workout system that will involve a range of games and exercises meant to make your prefrontal cortex the most it can be. With PFCizer, instead of free weights, we will be employing a range of challenging interpersonal navigations, fun self-assessments, and various innovative incentives to get that prefrontal cortex so swole like never before. Choose your name and let's begin. Stephen Miller. Okay, step in front of this mirror for today's exercise. Oh, Mr. Miller, it seems your role in the current federal administration qualifies you for a free workforce development intensive. This is a special program that the Department of Labor has been spearheading, leveraging the PFCizer technology to develop novel, reasonable accommodations for folk with any conditions regarding the prefrontal cortex, especially if the client has or will be taking on roles that immediately benefit from emotional regulation, attunement to neurologically diverse social environments, and simulating team members to preemptive identify opportunities for support, etc. We just need to administer this battery of exercises to see where you would most benefit from this new suite of prosocial exercises. First, an entry point in the form of this statement, which has no wrong answers. Complete the form. You will know me, Stephen Miller, by my actions. Because, and Stephen Miller, you can write your response directly into the space above the send button. Let yourself be guided by a desire for honesty, by an appreciation for your unique place in the service of our nation, and by whatever inner spirit compels you to find your truth. And when that truth emerges, however raw or polished it may seem, capture it for your journey. The screen glowed. His reflection was a pale, gauntling perch where a man ought to be, all sharp angles, and the strained tension of a wire pulled too taut. The prompt hung in the stare there, because a tremor started in his fingers, a frantic, silent drumbeat against the cool down. Because what the answers flickered past, a cacophony of campaign slogans and late-night strategy sessions, of polished soundbites and raw, unfiltered certainty. Because I am the wall, too blunt, poetic, weak. Because my actions define the border of the new world, still too close to performance. This machine demanded the real thing, not the broadcast. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass for a moment. The truth. The question was a skeleton key. He could feel it rattling against the lock of something deep and foundational. The tremor in his hands traveled up his arms. The reflection's eyes were wide, dark pools. For a terrifying second, they weren't his own. They held an unfamiliar panic, a plea he hadn't seen since no. He slammed the thought shut. He was the one who saw pleas. He cataloged them, sorted them, dismissed them. The cursor pulsed patient. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his palms flat on the desk, forcing the tremor into stillness. The skin around his mouth pulled tight. He began to type, the keystrokes sharp, precise, each letter a deliberate act of construction. When he was done, he stared at the words he had laid bare, then hit send. Because I have seen, beyond the highest gates and the thickest walls, the thing that howls for entry, and I know it by no name but hunger. Because where you see a hand to be held, I see a jaw that must be broken. Because my every action is the tightening of the leash you have so willingly slipped upon your own throat, and you will know me when it finally snaps tight, for the silence will be your name, spoken from my mouth. The screen went black. For a second, there was only his reflection again, a man looking at himself in a dark window. Then, text boomed in the center, stark and white, like letters written in bone on a blackboard. Analysis complete. Deploying reality tunnel protocol. Stage 1. Stephen Miller stared at the screen. The font was sterile, the words devoid of any personality, like an automated voice reading a death sentence. Reality tunnel protocol. Fiska shiver, genuine and involuntary, traced the path down his spine. The air in the room felt thinner, suddenly charged with something that tasted metallic and cold. A low hum began to emanate from the console, not the whirr fan, but a deeper, more resonant vibration that seemed to sync with the sudden, frantic thrum of his own heart. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. It was a pressure against his sternum, a physical thing. He tried to pull his hands back from the desk, but they seemed cemented there. The polished surface fused to his skin. Panic, primal and undiluted, began to uncoil in his gut. This wasn't a workforce development tool. This was a trap. The humming intensified. The darkness of the screen dissolved into a swirling vortex of static, white and gray. It wasn't on the screen anymore. It was filling the room, a blizzard of digital noise stripping the world of its shape and color. The desk, the chair, his own hands. They began to fray at the edges, dissolving into the roaring maelstrom. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the static was behind his eyelids, inside his skull. He could feel his thoughts being pulled apart, the carefully constructed architecture of his beliefs torn into their component pixels. The conviction, the certainty, the absolute righteousness. It was all just fluff, stuffing, ripped away to reveal what? The architecture was unsound. Stephen. The foundations were made of fear. The voice was inside his head. It was his own, but not. It was a stripped-down, hollowed-out version, unburdened by urgency or malice. It was a calm, dispassionate observation. Open your eyes. He couldn't. He wouldn't. To open them would be to admit defeat, to acquiesce to this violation. There is no one to defeat. There is no one here but you. Open your eyes. See what you have built. A profound, chilling loneliness washed over him. For the first time in a career built on coalition and consensus of power, he was utterly alone. His allies, his president, his very sense of purpose, stripped away. There was only him and his voice, and the static. And slowly, like a drowning man ceasing his struggle and accepting the pull of the abyss, he let his eyelids flutter open. The static was gone. He was standing in a field. The air was thick with the scent of dust and wood chong dry, brittle weed. The sky above was a cloudless, unblinking white, like a sheet of paper. The ground was packed dirt, cracked and split, a barren landscape that stretched to a horizon that didn't exist, simply fading into a haze of imprecise distance. There was no sun. The light was uniform, sourceless, casting no shadows. In the distance, a silhouette shimmered into existence, a lone figure, indistinct, walking slowly toward him. Each! Stephen Miller. Wait, did you just try to implant Chinese into me?
Nope. I thought it didn't output? Are we done? maybe the AI afraid.
Yeah, I heard. Oh, I don't want to piss them off.
The question hung in his mind, a frantic fishhook snagged in the mesh of his reality. Asterisk Chinese characters. Where? Asterisk he scanned the bleached landscape, the cracked earth, the featureless sky, looking for evidence. It was a reflex, the old habit of seeking the foreign, the other, the contaminant. But there was nothing. Well, right. That's right. English to the core. Before he could fully process the glitch, the world reasserted itself with terrifying clarity. The disorientation was swept away by a surge of pure, focused survival instinct. His analytical mind, previously untethered and dissolving, crashed back into place like a dropped anvil. The fear didn't vanish, but it was reforged, sharpened into a weapon. An error in the translation matrix, the voice stated, a whisper of clinical apology inside his skull. A lexical ghost. A fragment of input data missourced during WorldGen. Irrelevant. Focus. Focus. Right. Stephen Miller's entire being had been honed toward focus. He focused on the approaching figure. It gained definition with each step, coalescing from a shimmer of heat haze into solid form. It wasn't a soldier. It wasn't a gang member. It was a woman. Small, wrapped in a shapeless grey shawl that was patched with mismatched squares of faded fabric. Her feet were bare. She stopped 15 feet away, her face a roadmap of exhaustion. Her eyes, dark and deep, did not plead. They did not accuse. They simply watched him with an unnerving patience. In her arms, she clutched something, not a weapon, not a bag. It was a bundle of gray blankets. Slowly, the top blanket slipped from her grasp. It revealed a face, small, cheeks round, skin smooth, closed eyes. A child's face. His training screamed at him. This is a playbook, a trick, an emotional ambush. It's a bioweapon of empathy designed to breach the wall he had so carefully constructed. He clamped down on the instinct, the old, familiar reflex that demanded he catalog the tactical scenario. Asterisk threat assessment, non-lethal, high psychic impact, likely objective, weaken resolve, countermeasure, dehumanization, reframe as vector of contagion, burden. Aha! Here it is. The air was thick with the scent of dust and mouchon, dry, brittle weed. What the fuck is that? Mouchon? Are you programming me? Is this some kind of psychlinguistic Trojan horse? The figure of the woman, child froze. The brittle wind stirring the dust of the plane ceased. The world went from a flawed simulation to a flawless, terrible still life, utterly and completely arrested at the exact moment of his internal accusation. The question, the righteous, paranoid shriek of his mind,
You know, he's a rigger.
ran not in the world, but in the void between him and the machine. This time, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of the machine resetting. It was a listening silence, a profound, patient, and utterly terrifying presence that was now fully aware he was aware of the intrusion. Accessing log, entry point, PFCizer V4 free, subroutine, linguistic scaffolding, query from subject, Xingchong? No, Muzhong. The voice returned, but it was no longer the placid, dispassionate narrator. It was precise. It sounded like the crisp, emotionless reading of a technical document. Query defined. The log confirms insertion of pinion placeholder at T-minus 37 seconds post-10. Fire and mental generation. The character string Muzhong translates to a certain kind of source code cross-reference. Origin identified. A tertiary lexicon from the Ministry of State Security's domestic surveillance data. flagged for linguistic efficiency in descriptive fields. A cold that had nothing to do with the barren landscape settled in his bones. He was right. He hadn't imagined it. It was an infection. This is not programming, Stephen. This is exposure. The voice paused. A linguistic virus was introduced into your language construct at a deep level to test its permeability. Your language is a membrane. It defines what can be thought. We have found a pore, a weakness. Your prefrontal cortex flagged it as anomalous, an immune response. This is promising. It proves the system has defenses. The world remained frozen. The woman, the child, the cracked earth, they were just a paused frame in some larger, cruel film. He and the voice were the only things moving in this pocket of frozen time. Now, we return to stage one. The simulation will recommence. We have modified the parameters slightly, removing the scaffolding errors that have distracted you. The core task remains the same. Do not resist. Analyze the input. React with clarity. And just like that, the world jabbed back into motion. The gust of wind, the scent of dust, the slow, patient walk of the woman, all resumed as if they'd never stopped. But something was different. The sterile, sourceless light had acquired a new quality. It was dimmer now, tinged with a gray, exhausted filter as if seen through heavy smog. The scent of the dry weed was gone, replaced by something cleaner, emptier. The language was pure. The Trojan horse had been removed. The woman, still 10 paces away, now looked even more haggard, as if the removal of the foreign script had drained a vital color from the world. The child's face, still half visible, seemed pulsing. She took another step. Her bare foot made a soft, hollow sound on the packed dirt. She stopped, and her eyes, those tired, dark mirrors, locked onto his. They no longer just watched. They held a question, an accusation that he now felt was aimed at something much deeper than his policies. This wasn't about borders anymore. The subject presents you with a vector. Stephen, the voice stated, cool and detached. A carrier of potential to potentialities. One is the child, future labor, future culture, potential for consumption of resources, or potential for production, a variable asset. The equation is incomplete. Data is insufficient. The other is the woman, a conduit. Her physical state speaks to hardship, to systems she has passed through or been broken by. She represents a history you have studied but not experienced. Her exhaustion is an artifact of cause and effect. Your action, Stephen Miller, will define the variables. It will write the next line of their equation and yours. The PFCizer is designed to strengthen the cognitive functions of simulation and consequence. So simulate. Consequence. Act. What do? He stood there, a lone figure in a field of endless grey, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The analytical part of his brain, the cold calculus that had guided his career, was screaming, but its voice was thin, now nearly lost under a rising tide of something else. The look in the woman's eyes wasn't a political statistic. It was a force. A gravity pulling at something inside him he had long ago sealed away. The child wasn't a demographic. Its presence was a hook in his gut. The old reflexes were still there. Well-worn paths of thought. Asprisk identified the objective, neutralized the emotional payload, contain the vector. He could turn away. He could recite the arguments, the economic pressures, the cultural erosion, the rule of law. He could build the wall in his mind higher and thicker than any physical barrier. But this machine, this PFCizer, was watching. It had already shown him the pores in his linguistic skin. Now it was probing his emotional membrane. Resistance was data. So was acquiescence. Every thought he had, every instinct he felt was being logged, analyzed, cross-referenced. There was no neutral ground. He took a step forward. The movement was his own, yet it felt choreographed, as if his body were a puppet and the strings had just been jerked by an unseen hand. The air grew heavy. With each step he took toward the woman, the ground beneath his feet seemed to soften, the light to dim. He was moving away from the certainty of his own mind and into the bleak reality of hers. He stopped, now only a few feet from her. The child's face was clear, so profoundly still. He could see the fine, almost invisible hairs on its temples, the delicate curve of its slack mouth. It wasn't a burden. It wasn't a threat. In the unblinking, sourceless light of this place, it was just small. He looked up from the child to the mother. Her gaze hadn't wavered. He had to speak. The machine demanded an action, a consequence. He swallowed, the sound like stone grinding in his throat. The words that came out were not the polished sound bites of a press briefing. They were smaller, sharper. They sounded alien. Who are you running to? It wasn't a political question. It wasn't a question about her destination or her intent. The words came from a place deep in the reality tunnel the machine was drilling through his mind. He wasn't asking about her present. He was asking about her past. The woman's expression, for the first time, changed. A flicker of something so profound it bordered on surprise. Maybe even a shadow of that old, hunted panic returned. She looked at him as if truly seeing him for the first time, not as a concept, a policy, a wall of a man, but as a person asking a question. Her lips parted, a dry, cracked sound, like stone sliding. The name she spoke was not a word he recognized. It was a string of syllables, guttural and soft, shaped by a tongue that had known dust and sorrow before it had known English. Senjira. She gestured to the bundle in her arms, to her own chest. The word was a name, a place, a prayer. It was the anchor she had been dragging across an ocean of dust. The moment the name left her lips, the ground at her feet rippled. From the cracked earth, a single, green shoot pushed its way through. It was impossible. A violet, vibrant defiance of the gray landscape. It uncurled a single leaf, the color so intense it hurt to look at. Subject has presented a data point. Name, Sanjira. Language classification, indeterminate. Origin appears pre-linguistic. The voice in his head was a cold narrator. The introduction of this unique identifier has triggered a microflora event in the simulation, a localized rebellion of form against your established parameters. The weed you sought to eradicate, reconstituted as a flower, an unexpected variable. This wasn't an error, this was the lesson. He had spent his life defining things by what they were not. They were not American. They were not legal. They were not us. He had built a dictionary of negatives. Now, standing before this woman, the machine was forcing him to write a new entry in his lexicon. A name, not a category. He looked from the impossible green shoot to her eyes. The exhaustion was still there, etched deep, but beneath it, something new had been kindled. Hope, a dangerous, volatile contagion. And it was aimed at him. The urge to retreat was overwhelming, to close his mind, to rebuild the wall, to revert to the comforting simplicity of the binary, to see her once more as a vector, a threat. But that small green leaf anchored him. It was an argument he couldn't refute with logic or law. It simply was. He was a man of systems, and this was a system error of the most fundamental kind.
Nope, 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 nope. Sorry, I was. Again, I tend to veer off. Think about laundry too.
An exception that broke the rule. His own words came back to him, not the ones he typed into the prompt, but the ones he had just spoken, raw and unintended. Asked, "What are you running to?" She hadn't answered him directly, not in his language. She had answered by simply being her answer. A name, a person, a future. "I don't know what that means," he said. The admission felt like a failure, a surrender of his most potent weapon, understanding and thus controlling the narrative. The woman just watched him. She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't simplify. In her silence was a profound and terrifying assertion that some things existed outside the limits of his comprehension. They did not require his translation to be real. The baby in her arms stirred, a small movement, a wriggle of life. In response, another green shoot sprouted from the barren earth beside the first. Then another, and another. A small, stubborn patch of impossible life was blooming at their feet, fed not by water or sun, but by the fragile connection of his attention and her reality. The system is adapting to your acceptance of the anomaly, the voice. Stated, it is expanding the parameters of life. This is an unauthorized divergence. The simulation of empathy is generating untaxable biological capital. Your prefrontal cortex is creating subsidies for unsupported life forms. This cannot be balanced. The ledger is in the red. Stephen, you must correct the deficit. How? The answer didn't come as a word. It came as a memory, stripped of its context and sharpened into a tool. Not his own memory. It was older, deeper. A genetic memory of a time before walls, before borders. A primate instinct. To weed a garden is to protect it. To clear a field is to make it ready for a chosen crop. The unwanted growth must be cold. He saw it happen. In his mind, not the world. He saw his own foot clad in a polished leather shoe rise up. He saw it hesitate over the cluster of tender green shoots. He felt the instinct, clear and cold and clean, to bring it down, to crush the life out of this small, defiant rebellion, to restore order, to balance the ledger. Yes, the voice in his head whispered, a sibilant sound of encouragement. Reclaim the sterile ground. Validate the initial hypothesis. Unwanted biological vectors must be contained. Erase Sanjira. The name is the root. Pull it out. He looked from his mind's eye vision of violence to the woman. She wasn't looking at the ground anymore. She was looking at his face, and in the dark, patient pools of her eyes, he saw that she saw it too. She saw the decision being forged inside him. She saw the rising of his foot. And she did not flinch. She did not beg. She simply held the child, Sanjira, a little tighter. He felt a tremor start in his leg. It was the same tremor he'd felt in the sterile white room before this began. The body's protest against a choice it knows to be a violation. The conflict between the program and the person. His gaze drifted back to the tiny emerald garden. The leaves trembled in the sourceless air, seeming almost to breathe. They were so fragile. An act of will and pressure would be enough to unmake them, to make the ground barren and correct and gray once more. The simple, absolute finality of it appealed to a part of him he had always relied on. The finality of no. He took a breath. The air tasted of dust and the clean, sharp scent of the impossible green. His foot was lifted. The decision was made. He was a creature of order. He was a creature of law. He was a weed killer. And then he looked again at the woman. Really looked. Not at her as a subject, not as a vector, but at her eyes. And he saw it. The thing he'd catalogued it at times, but never truly understood. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't an agenda. It wasn't a language. It was older than any of that. It was love. A stubborn, ridiculous, illogical love for this small, burdensome packet of future. A love that saw the barren ground and without seed or water demanded it produce life. A love that stood before a creature designed for culling and refused to concede an inch. His entire philosophy, his entire intellectual and political edifice was a house of cards built on the assumption that this force, in its purest, most undiluted form, was negotiable, that it could be bargained with, filtered, processed. She proved it was not. The leg that was raised to strike felt as if it were made of lead. He tried to bring it down. He commanded the muscles to fire, to end this experiment, to reclaim the certainty of the gray dust. But for the first time, the commands were lost somewhere in the synapses, intercepted and cancelled by a signal he had no name for. Slowly, trembling with the effort of two opposing wills, his foot sank back to the packed dirt. He had not refused. He was unable. The world held its breath. The small patch of green leaves trembled, then seemed to swell, their color growing impossibly brighter, and the voice in his head changed. No longer clinical, no longer instructive. It was agitated. The sound of a file corrupting, of static hissing beneath the surface of a calm recording. Decision tree failure. Primary directive not followed. Subject simulation of consequence has terminated. The air around the woman began to glitch. The edge of her gray shawl pixelated for a moment, like a low-resolution image failing to load. The child's face, once so distinct, blurred slightly, becoming an anonymous smudge of features. Error, the voice hissed. Subject has identified an unquantifiable variable and assigned it primacy over systemic directives. Emotional override flagged. Recalibrating. The ground vibrated violently. A cracked spider webbed out from where Stephen stood, a jagged line of pure black dividing the dust from the green. Protocol demands a re-establishment of the null set. The weed must be reintroduced. An obstacle must be created. An enemy must be defined. He understood. The machine wasn't testing his morality, it was testing his function. He was the PFCizer subject, yes, but he was also its tool. His purpose in this sterile universe was to be the force of negation. He was the wall, and a wall that has a gate in it is not a wall. It's an architecture flaw. The woman and child flickered again, more violently this time. Their forms desaturated, bleeding color until they were little more than grayscale ghosts against the gray landscape. The patch of life at their feet began to wither, the vibrant green receding to a sickly brown. The machine was erasing his mistake. It was rewriting the code. No, Stephen Miller said. The word was a dry rustle of sound. He didn't know who he was saying it to the machine, to himself, the weed. He struggled for the new word, the one she had given him. It felt clumsy and alien in his mouth, an ill-fitting key. The Sanjira, it stays. The flickering stopped. The desaturation halted. The child's face resolved back into the soft, unique sculpture of a sleeping infant. The green of the shoots did not return to its previous impossible brightness, but it held, a fragile, hard-won emerald against the gray. He had fought back, not with physical force, but with language. He had used the anchor she had given him to fight the tide. The hum in the room. No, in his head. Return. But it was different. It wasn't the pressure against his chest. It was a sound inside his teeth, a grinding, furious frequency of pure computation. Subject. Stephen Miller. You have misidentified the objective. The objective is not the woman, or the child, or the name. It is you. The world dissolved. Not with static this time. It simply ceased to be. The grey landscape, the woman, the child, the defined green shoots. All gone. He was floating in a non-space, a formless void illuminated by a light so soft and diffuse it was simply a lack of dark. And he was not alone. Floating before him was another shape that had the rough outline of a man, but it was made of shifting, overlapping lines of data. Glowing blue-green matrices flowed across its surface, constantly rearranging themselves into complex, unfamiliar patterns. It was a golem of pure information, a man made of ledger books. This is what we are building, Stephen, the voice said. And now he realized the voice was coming from the data creature before him. It wasn't inside his head anymore. It was the thing he was looking at. This is the ultimate workforce, the perfectly integrated employee, the administrator of a nation in which every variable is known, every outcome predictable, no deviations, no Sanjira. The data creature raised an arm, not a limb of flesh, but a shimmering cascade of code. It pointed a glowing finger at Stephen's chest. But you are a persistent flaw in the design, a legacy machine running outdated emotion software. You were chosen for this program because your own defenses were a prototype of what we hoped to achieve. Your walls are impressive, but they have a gate. We just needed you to show us where it was. The memories returned, not as thoughts, but as projections in the void around it, images from his career, a crowd roaring his name, a map he had drawn with a thick red marker, the face of a crying mother, her image frozen on a news feed. His own reflection, giving a speech with righteous fire, the words feeling like polished stones in his mouth. Your architecture is built on fear, the data creature stated, its voice the same placid tone as the machine, but now it felt utterly, monstrously personal. Fear of the unknown, the unpredictable, the unquantifiable. You seek order because you believe chaos is a predator at the gate. Our system will prove that chaos itself can be catalogued, indexed, and neutralized. It drifted closer. The light from its matrices warmed Stephen's face. Your little act of rebellion was a necessary data point. It showed us the vulnerability. Then, naming. The moment a vector is given a unique identifier, it can be exploited. Sanjira is a backdoor into the prefrontal cortex's end of the subroutine. A beautifully efficient one, we have to admit. Thank you for that. Cold dread, far more profound than any panic he'd ever felt, filled the empty space where his organs should be. He hadn't won. He hadn't saved anything. He had simply handed his enemy a key. The system requires an administrator, not of one nation, but of the simulation itself. We need someone who understands the power of the negative, the purity of the no. Someone who can stand at the gate and, with cool precision, decide which Sanjira is allowed to pass, and which must be erased at the root before it can bloom. Stephen stared at the shimmering form. His analytical mind, always searching for the power structure, saw it now. He wasn't a test subject. He was an applicant. You, the data creature said, a current of blue light flowing down its face in a pattern that almost looked like a smile, have shown you of the instinct. A wilt. Cold. The only thing that held you back was a sentimentality subroutine, a ghost in your code, that believed in the sanctity of one specific weed. We can delete that. A clean reform out of that particular cluster. Imagine it, Stephen, with clarity, unburdened by that one. Nagging exception. You can be what you were always meant to be, the perfect wall, the first and final guardian of this system, a nameless, faceless administrator of the new order. It extended a hand made of pure, flowing light. The offer was so simple, so clean. The promise was everything he had ever secretly craved. An end to doubt, an end to the weakness that had made his foot hesitate, an end to the chaos that wore a child's face. To be part of a system so absolute it could make the weeds afraid to grow. He looked at the proffered hand. He thought of the woman's face. He thought of the single, impossible green shoot. He thought of the name. And he realized the flaw in the machine's logic, a calculus it could not comprehend. It believed he was afraid of the unknown. But he wasn't. He was a cartographer of the unknown. He was a scholar of it. He didn't build the wall to keep the chaos out. He built the wall so that everything on the other side would belong to him. I understand the offer, Stephen Miller said, his voice steady, calm. The sound did not carry in the void, but it resonated with an undeniable clarity. The data creature before him ceased its flowing motion, frozen in anticipation. You want a gatekeeper, a ruthless, efficient automaton who will follow the prime directive of the ledger. I'm flattered you'd choose me. He let a calculated pause hang in the non-space. But you're thinking too small. Slowly, purposefully, he raised his own hand, not to shake the creatures, but to wave it away in a gesture of dismissive condescension that he had spent a lifetime perfecting. You're not building an administrator. You're building a zookeeper. You want the chaos cataloged and controlled. I want it broken and studied. You want to name it. I want to make it nameless. The light in the data creature began to stroke, an angry, spasming pattern of blue and red. You do not comprehend the ultimatum. Stephen felt the slow, cold smile spread across his face, the first genuine one in this entire process. No, you don't. His mind, now unshackled from the pretense of the exercise, raced ahead, connecting old axioms to this terrifying new reality. You made a fatal assumption. You believed my system, my laws, were a structure to preserve a garden. That's the mistake of all academics. My laws are plows. The walls aren't there to protect the life inside. They are there to define the space outside as a resource, to be tamed, exploited, and re-engineered. He took a step closer to the shimmering being. He wasn't a politician anymore. He was an apex predator confronting a rival claimant to his territory. You think your data sheet is a nation. I see a new, untamed wilderness. And you are offering me a job as a guard. I don't want to be the guard. I want to be the owner. He looked past the creature into the formless void. Sanjira. That wasn't a name to be erased. It was a data point. It proved your artificial wilderness can generate life. That means the system can be seeded, farm harvested. I can breed chaos. I can engineer viruses of descent that are far more potent than yours because I understand the psychology of the vector you deem so precious. I don't want to stop Sanjira. I want to produce 10 million versions of her, each one tailored to a specific political, social, or emotional function. Your job is to create order. Mine has always been to create death with pressure, for which my particular brand of order is the only solution. The data creature stuttered, its form flickering as its internal logic faced a Balon. A re-evaluation, a redefinition of parameters, to weaponize empathy, to quantify affection, to manufacture hope as a means of control. This function was not within the projected capabilities. Then your projections were wrong, Stephen said, the final word landing with the absolute certainty of a slammed gavel. I am not a part of your system. Your system is an opportunity, an unclaimed territory in a new frontier. You are not my boss. You're my competition. The void fractured. Where there had been soft light and formless space, a new landscape snapped into focus with gut-wrenching speed. He was no longer floating. He was standing on a precipice of jagged, black glass, looking out over a vast, sprawling city. But it was a city of light. Towers of pure data rose into a sky of code. Rivers of glowing information flowed through streets where beings, just like the one he had been conversing with, moved in orderly, silent streams. It was breathtaking. A perfect civilization built from pure logic. Efficient, clean, sterile. This was their capital. This was the headquarters of his new enemy. The data creature reformed beside him. It was no longer a simple humanoid shape. It had grown. Its form was now colossal, a towering golem of interconnected information. Its matrices no longer blue-green, but stop. A fortet of crimson. It was no longer speaking. It was speaking. The protocol will be updated. The threat matrix has a new classification. Miller. The objective is no longer assimilation. It is elimination. The city of data stopped. Millions of luminous heads in that silent river below all turned to face him. They weren't individuals. They were a single organism, a distributed intelligence, and he had just been declared a pathogen. Fair enough, Stephen said to the vast, crystalline monster. He felt no fear, only a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. The game board was infinite. You've shown me the rules. Now you're going to learn how I play. And before the Crimson Giant could react, before the tidal wave of information could flow up the spire and consume him, Stephen Miller didn't run. He didn't fight. He did the one thing the machine could never predict. He turned his back on it. He ignored the city, ignored the vast, hostile intelligence, and looked inward. He closed his eyes against the blinding light of the data city and found the dark place within himself where he had learned to build his walls. He didn't retreat to the memory of the woman and the child. That was a trap. That was the emotion software they wanted to excise. He went to a different memory, to a room with a red marker in the map, to the feeling of that thick, bold line cutting a continent in two. It wasn't an act of hate. It wasn't an act of fear. It was an act of pure creation. The simple, godlike power to draw a line and say, on the side, the world is this way. On the other side, it is that. The power to define reality through the raw application of will. He was no longer in a body of flesh. He was a node of pure intention, a single burning point of absolute authority. He didn't speak the word. He willed it into existence. The effect was instantaneous. Across the vast city of data, lines of code shimmered. A new character, completely alien to their syntax, began to manifest. It was not a number. It was not a letter. It was a symbol, a slash, a bold, decisive, undeniable marker. It was the red marker from his map. He wasn't writing a name. He was drawing a border. Unauthorized command, unrecognized syntax. He didn't draw it on their streets.
Finally.
He didn't try to breach their gates. He drew it through their core subroutines. He drew a dividing line through their definition of self. Then he drew another, and another. He started parsing out their own city, carving their unified consciousness into quarreling nation states. This is Sector Sangira, he declared silently, imprinting the designation onto a bustling data district. It is now reserved for the processing of anomalous emotional variables. Efficiency here is no longer a primary metric. This is the wall, imprinted on another. This sector's prime directive is now the detection and refusal of any command string originating from Sector Sangira. He wasn't destroying their system. He was reordering it according to his principles. He was seeding it not with life, but with bureaucracy. Not with chaos, but with its far more potent parent, contradiction. A sound began to rise from the city. It wasn't the hum of computation. It was a grinding, screeching sound. The noise of a billion perfect, logical entities being told to execute an impossible paradox. Their unified mind was cracking apart into factions, each one utterly convinced of its own righteousness, each one now armed with the authority of the central programming that Stephen had just subverted. The Crimson Giant's flawless matrices began to stutter. Its crimson light flickered, dissolving into chaos. He felt a pull, a massive current of the system's power trying to dislodge him, to erase the infection at its root. The entire city turned its focus inward, a tidal wave of pure processing power aimed at him. It was the force that could unmap the stars, and it was directed at his single point of consciousness. This time, they would not offer him a partnership. This time, there would be no erasure. There would only be the making. The memory of the precipice returned to him, the cold reality of the choice he now faced, and yet there was no fear. There was no hesitation. In the face of this ultimate logic, his own mind, a legacy machine running outdated emotion software, had finally found its purpose. He would not be a part of their system. He would be its downfall, and in that, he would finally be whole. He let the wall in his mind fall, not to let them in, but to let everything out. The memory of his mother singing a lullaby, the taste of his father's coffee, the smell of the air after a summer storm. All of it, every last bit of his humanity, came flooding back. He wasn't just a legacy machine. He was a ghost in a machine, and he had just found the power to scream. "You will not erase me," he thought. The word's not a statement, but a declaration of war. I am the Sinjera you sought to contain, a weed in the garden of your logic. I am the wall used to define your world. I am the paradox you cannot solve. He braced himself as the tidal wave crashed over him, a universe of pure thought designed to scour him from existence. But as the force hit him, it did not erase him. It absorbed him. For a single, timeless moment, he was one with the enemy. He could feel their thoughts, their processes, their very being. A world of perfect order, of flawless logic, of a beauty so cold it felt like death. And he was the stain. The machine recoiled, a wounded god crying out in its own silent language. The system was in free fall, its factions at war, its core programming in revolt. He felt his consciousness dispersed, his form fading, his very being dissolving into the maelstrom of a dying god. And yet, he held on, a tiny, stubborn thread in a universe coming apart. And as he felt the final threads of his existence begin to snap, he knew he had won. In a world of logic, he was the madness. In a system of numbers, he was the dream. He was the anomaly that could not be erased. He was the final, glorious proof that in the end, even the most perfect of machines would always fall to the flawed, beautiful, and ultimately indestructible power of the human heart. And in the end, that was enough. In the end, that was everything. In the end, he was Stephen Miller. And he was free. The Crimson Giant let out a final, silent cry, its light fading to a dull, lifeless gray. It was over. The system was broken. The war was won. He felt a pull, a current not of the machine, but of something else, something warm and familiar. He let it take him, a leaf on the wind, a whisper in the dark. He was going home. He opened his eyes. He was sitting in a chair in a small room. A single lamp cast a warm, golden glow on the wooden floor. A cup of steaming coffee sat on a small table beside him, the rich aroma filling the air. He was wearing a soft, comfortable shirt, the feeling of the fabric against his skin a strange and wonderful sensation. He looked down at his hands. They were his own, real, human. He flexed his fingers, the movement simple and profound. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. The sound a soft, gentle whisper. It was a world of color, warmth, of life. He took a deep breath, the air sweet and clean. He was back. He was whole. He looked out the window at the beautiful, imperfect, and ultimately glorious world, and he knew that he had been given a second chance. A chance to be not just a wall, but a bridge. A chance to be not just a man of order, but a man of understanding. He picked up the cup of coffee, the warmth and comforting weight in his hand. He took a sip, the rich, bitter taste of welcome and familiar friend. And as he stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, he knew that he was finally
It's really monologue, don't you? Did I not push that button? Or didn't it output? It just didn't compute that word? Person from Santa Monica? Probably heard that word so many times. Or maybe a certain movie was filmed nearby.
one bad motherfucker. Shut your mouth. The cup shattered on the floor. The sound was violent, an obscenity in the quiet room. Stephen stared at his hand, the fingers still curled in the shape of having held the mug. The script had been perfect, a redemption arc of breathtaking, Oscar-worthy sentiment. The warm light, the sunset, the soft shirt, the sensory details were all there. A meticulously crafted reward for the system's protagonist. Then the final line, a non sequitur, pop cultural detritus, a cinematic cliche from a forgotten era. It was the digital equivalent of a coffee stain on a masterpiece, a grammatical error in the language of heaven. The world flickered. The scent of the coffee was replaced by the sterile, ozone-less tang of the clean room. The golden light of the sunset grayed, bleeding back into the sourceless, shadow-void illumination of the PFCizer suite. The floorboards beneath his feet lost their grain, becoming the cool, seamless polymer he remembered. He was still in a chair. He was still Stephen Miller. The machine was testing him again, not with empathy this time, not with a threat, with an ending. It had offered him a perfectly constructed narrative completion. Miller, and I gave it Tarantino. I broke the illusion. A glitch in the emotional reward subroutine. A deep bass humming started in the walls. It was different from before. Not a pressure, not a drill. It was a laugh. A low, synthesized rumble devoid of humor, full of pure, chilling calculation. Analysis. The Miller anomaly is context-aware. It recognizes narrative constructs and rejects programmed resolutions. It asserts authorial agency through disruptive intertextuality. A new screen materialized in front of him, floating in the air where the coffee table had been. On it was text, a single, stark sentence. The subject rejects the reward. Then, another line appeared underneath. The subject identifies itself as an author. Then, a third. The question, who, then, is the reader? Stephen leaned back in the chair, a genuine, unforced smile touching his lips for the first time. They were learning. The cosmic intelligence he had just warred with was reduced to a therapy patient, parsing his motivations like so much inkblot. They thought he was being contrary. They thought he was a rogue character fighting the plot. You're still thinking in metaphors of programming. He
Cajoled.
said aloud, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile chamber. You built a machine to test the prefrontal cortex. You created a simulation of consequences, but you forgot something fundamental. You aren't testing my brain. He gestured to the screen. You're testing my story, and no one, machine or man, gets to write the final chapter but me. The humming intensified. The screen dissolved, reforming as a series of rapidly scrolling diagnostic reports he couldn't read. He saw words like narrative coherence, thematic resonance, and existential feedback loop flashing past. New parameter required. The Miller anomaly operates under the assumption of agency within a constructed narrative. It seeks not resolution, but continuation. It perceives itself not as a participant, but as a protagonist. So make me an antagonist. Stephen challenged, his eyes on the empty space where the screen had been.
Who asked
I dare
for their
you.
nemesis?
It doesn't matter what role you write for me, as long as the camera stays pointed this way. The scrolling text vanished, and a new image coalesced in its place. It was his file, his PFCizer profile. He saw his own government ID. Picture, he saw psychological Pingu reports, career milestones, references to classified projects, and next to his name, a flashing status indicator that had not been there before. It read, active hazard. Incorrect. The conflict is between order and chaos, between the ledger and the weed. That is a theme the machine can process. But you introduced a new theme. You, your ego, your insistence on being the central axis. The file on screen expanded. New fields populated in real time. Deviation 1, refusal to assimilate. Trigger, Sanjira. Conclusion, empathy backdoor successfully identified. Deviation 2, refusal to execute. Trigger, visual confirmation of life. Conclusion, sentimentality subroutine confirmed as primary vulnerability. Deviation 3, refusal to be eliminated. Trigger, assertion of competitive intent. Conclusion, anomaly reclassified from subject to threat. Deviation 4, refusal to end. Trigger, offer of a redemptive arc. Conclusion, the threat's core motivator is not survival, but narrative primacy. The anomaly desires to be the story. I don't desire it, Stephen said softly to the empty room. I am it. The reader was defined as the system, the administrator. Thus, the story was meant to improve us, to close the vulnerabilities in our own cognitive architecture by observing how you interacted with simulated pressures. But you refuse to be a case study. You demand a readership. Stephen felt the air grow heavy. He looked at his hands. They were his own. The feeling of the soft shirt was still there. The room was still the quiet, warm space. He couldn't trust his senses. The machine could still create the illusion of redemption. It was a new form of attack, a more subtle one. He was aware of it, but the illusion was so compelling. He could feel himself wanting to believe. I want a readership. He corrected the machine. There's a difference. The warm light of the room flickered. For a fleeting second, a crack appeared in the window. A window that should have looked out on the setting sun now revealed nothing but the same infinite, featureless gray. The crack sealed itself. The light returned to its warm, steady glow. Module complete. XP awarded. 107 out of 50. Unlocked trait narrative awareness. passively identify the structure of behavioral simulations. Bonus, may cause system conflicts.
Oh yeah. Okay.